What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a morning show set expecting a normal interview, only to be blindsided by a host who clearly woke up on the wrong side of fame? In just 35 seconds of cutting remarks and thinly veiled insults, George Stephanopoulos managed to turn what should have been a friendly chat into an absolute disaster that ended with Tom Hardy walking off the set in front of millions of viewers. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a masterclass in how not to treat your guests, and it all happened live on Good Morning America. Tom Hardy arrived at the studio that morning like he always does, calm, professional, ready to talk about his latest film. The cameras were rolling, the audience was ready, and the panel was set. George Stephanopoulos sat in the center, flanked by Robin Roberts and Michael Strawn, all smiles and coffee cups as the show's theme music faded out. "We're so excited to have Tom Hardy here with us this morning," Robin said, her voice warm and welcoming, as Tom settled into the guest chair. He smiled, gave a little wave to the audience, and you could tell he was in good spirits. This was supposed to be easy. This was morning television, but George had other plans. "So Tom," George started, and there was already something off about his tone. It wasn't friendly. It was sharp. "You've made quite a career out of playing tough guys, haven't you? The brooding, the mumbling, the whole mysterious act." Tom's smile flickered for just a second. You could see it in his eyes. That wasn't a question. That was a jab. "Well, I suppose I've played a variety of characters," Tom said carefully, keeping his voice even. "Some of them are intense, sure, but that's the job. You try to bring truth to whatever role you're playing." "Truth," George repeated, and he actually laughed. Not a friendly laugh, a dismissive one. "Is that what you call it when half the audience needs subtitles to understand what you're saying?" The studio went quiet. Robin's head turned sharply toward George, her eyes wide. Michael shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. This wasn't banter. This was an attack. Tom sat back in his chair, and you could see him processing what just happened. "I'm sorry. Are you having a go at my acting?" "I'm just saying what a lot of people think," George continued, and now he was leaning forward, like he was really going for it. "You've built this whole career on being difficult to understand, on this tough guy image. But when you really look at it, what have you actually done that's memorable? Besides Inception, which, let's be honest, that was all Leonardo DiCaprio." Michael actually put his hand up, trying to intervene. "Hey, come on now, George. Tom's done incredible work. Mad Max, The Revenant, Venom." But George wasn't done. "Venom? You mean that movie where you talk to yourself for 2 hours? Real challenging stuff." There. Tom's jaw tightened. You could see the shift happening. He'd come here to be professional, to promote his film, to have a nice conversation. Instead, he was being disrespected on national television by someone who clearly thought his position as a news anchor somehow gave him the right to tear down a guest. "Listen, mate," Tom said, and his voice had changed now. It was lower, more controlled, and anyone who knows Tom Hardy knows that's when you should pay attention. "I don't know what your problem is this morning, but I came here in good faith. If you've got some issue with me or my work, maybe we should have this conversation off camera." "Oh, here we go," George said, actually rolling his eyes. "The big tough guy routine. What are you going to do, Tom? Glare at me intensely? Maybe grunt a few times?" Robin actually stood up at this point. "George, that's enough. This is completely inappropriate." But George was on a roll now, and he wasn't stopping. "You know what your problem is? You've been coasting on this reputation for years. People think you're some serious actor, some method genius. But really, you just show up, mumble your lines, and hope nobody notices you're doing the same performance over and over again." The audience was dead silent. You could hear someone cough in the back. This wasn't entertainment. This was uncomfortable. This was cruel. Tom stood up. Not quickly, not aggressively. He just calmly stood up and started to remove his microphone. "Tom, please," Robin said, moving toward him. "You don't have to leave. This is not how we do things here." "What are you doing?" George asked. And now there was something else in his voice. Maybe he was realizing he'd gone too far, or maybe he was just annoyed that his guest wasn't sitting there taking it. Tom looked directly at George, and when he spoke, his voice was perfectly calm. That's what made it so powerful. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was just done. "I'm leaving," Tom said simply, "because I have too much respect for myself to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has none for me." "Oh, please," George shot back. "Don't be so sensitive. This is just a conversation." "A conversation?" Tom repeated, and now there was fire in his voice. "A conversation is two people talking with mutual respect. What you're doing is trying to humiliate me on your show. Because, what, it makes you feel important? It makes you feel powerful?" Michael stood up now too, trying to de-escalate. "Hey, let's all just take a breath here." But Tom was already unhooking his mic pack. "I've done hundreds of interviews. Thousands, probably. I've sat with journalists who've asked tough questions, challenging questions, questions that made me think. But you," he pointed at George, "you're not interested in a conversation. You're interested in a performance. Your performance. And I'm not going to be your prop." "This is ridiculous," George said, looking at the cameras. "We bring him on the show, give him a platform to promote his movie, and this is how he acts?" That's when Tom really let him have it. "Give me a platform?" Tom's voice was incredulous now. "Mate, I don't need your platform. You invited me here. I showed up, on time, prepared to talk about my work, to be professional. And from the second I sat down, you've done nothing but take shots at me, at my career, at my craft. Things you know nothing about." Robin was shaking her head, looking genuinely upset. "Tom, I am so sorry. This is not okay." "You sit behind that desk," Tom continued, pointing at George, "and you think that gives you the right to talk down to people, to belittle them. You spent, 20 years in politics, covering politicians, and you learned all their worst habits, the smugness, the condescension, the need to always be right." George's face was red now. "How dare you? How dare I?" Tom cut him off. "How dare you? I came here as your guest, in anyone's home, in anyone's space. You treat guests with respect, basic human respect, but you couldn't even manage that, could you?" The entire studio was watching this unfold. Camera operators, producers, audience members, everyone frozen. "You want to know what's memorable?" Tom asked, his voice getting quieter, but somehow more intense. "What's memorable is watching someone abuse their position, watching someone use their platform not to have interesting conversations, not to bring out the best in their guests, but to make themselves feel superior." "I think you should leave," George said, trying to regain control. "I am leaving," Tom replied. "That's what I've been trying to do. But you can't even let me do that with dignity, can you? You have to have the last word. You have to be the one in control." Michael put his hand on Tom's shoulder. "Brother, you don't have to explain yourself." Tom looked at Michael, then at Robin, and his expression softened just a bit. "I know you two had nothing to do with this. You've been nothing but professional." Then he turned back to George one more time. "You know what the saddest part is? You had a chance to have a real conversation. I would have talked about the film, about the process, about what it takes to bring these characters to life. I would have been honest, open, real. But you didn't want that. You wanted to score points. You wanted to prove something. And the only thing you've proved is that having a big job doesn't make you a big person." George opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time since the interview started, he was speechless. Tom finished removing his microphone and handed it to a nearby producer. "Thank you for having me," he said, and the politeness in his voice somehow made everything sting more. "I'm sorry it had to end this way." He started walking off the set, and you could hear his footsteps in the silence. Robin was standing there, hand over her mouth. Michael was staring at George with a look that said everything, and George just sat there, his face a mixture of anger and something else. Maybe embarrassment. Maybe the realization of what he'd just done. But Tom wasn't done. He stopped at the edge of the set, turned around, and addressed the camera directly. "To anyone watching who was looking forward to hearing about the film, I apologize. I really do. I wanted to be here. I wanted to share that with you. But I can't, and I won't sit somewhere where I'm treated like this. Nobody should. Not me, not the next guest who comes on this show, not anyone." His voice was steady, clear, every word landing with weight. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being disrespectful, between being challenging and being cruel. And if you can't tell the difference, you have no business interviewing people. Robin spoke up then, her voice shaking slightly. "Tom, you're absolutely right, and I want to apologize on behalf of—" "Don't," Tom said gently, holding up his hand. "Don't apologize for him. That's not your responsibility. You seem like lovely people. This isn't on you." He looked one more time at George, who was now staring at the desk in front of him. "I hope you figure out why you felt the need to do this. I really do. Because this isn't about me. This is about whatever's going on with you." And then he walked off. Just like that. No dramatic storm off, no throwing anything, no yelling. He just calmly, with complete dignity, removed himself from a situation where he was being disrespected. The camera stayed on the panel. Robin looked like she wanted to cry. Michael was shaking his head slowly, and George sat there, suddenly very small behind his big desk, as the reality of what just happened started to sink in. "We need to go to commercial," someone said off camera. But before they could cut away, Robin leaned into her microphone. "I'm so sorry to everyone watching. That was completely unacceptable, and it does not represent who we are or what this show stands for." Michael nodded. Tom Hardy is a consummate professional and a talented actor, and he deserved so much better than what just happened here. George finally looked up, opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. What could he say? The damage was done. The whole thing had happened live, in front of millions of people. There was no taking it back, no editing it out, no pretending it didn't happen. "Commercial," the director's voice came through again, more urgent this time. The camera started to pull back, and you could see the full scene. The empty guest chair where Tom had been sitting. Robin standing off to the side, arms crossed, Michael leaning back, processing everything, and George, still at the desk, looking smaller by the second. What happened in that studio wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a perfect example of what happens when ego gets in the way of professionalism. When someone in a position of power forgets that respect isn't about titles or desk size or how many years you've been on television. It's about basic human decency. Tom Hardy didn't lose his temper. He didn't yell or throw things or make a scene in the traditional sense. He simply refused to accept being treated poorly, and he did it with more class and dignity than the person who was supposed to be hosting him. Because here's the thing about respect. You can't demand it. You can't force it. You earn it through how you treat people, especially when you have power and they're in a vulnerable position. George Stephanopoulos had all the power in that situation. He had the home field advantage, the microphone, the control room backing him up, and he used all of that to punch down at someone who came in good faith. Tom Hardy, on the other hand, only had his own integrity, and in that moment, that was more than enough. The interview was supposed to last 20 minutes. It lasted less than 10. Those 10 minutes, though, showed everyone watching exactly who these two men really were. One was desperate to prove his superiority, to show everyone how clever and sharp he could be at someone else's expense. The other was simply trying to maintain his dignity in the face of unprovoked hostility. And when it came down to it, when the moment demanded a choice between staying and enduring disrespect or leaving and maintaining self-respect, Tom Hardy made the only choice that mattered. He chose himself. That's not being difficult. That's not being a diva. That's being a human being who knows their worth and refuses to let anyone diminish it, no matter how big their platform is. The empty chair said everything. It was a visual reminder that you can have all the success in the world, all the credentials, all the years of experience, but if you treat people poorly, eventually they'll just get up and leave. And they'll be right to do so. Robin and Michael knew it. You could see it in their faces, in how they tried to salvage something from the wreckage. They understood that what they'd just witnessed wasn't a celebrity meltdown. It was a man standing up for himself against someone who'd forgotten that the desk you sit behind doesn't give you the right to treat guests like targets. George's words hung in the air even after Tom left. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every attempt to belittle and diminish. They didn't make Tom Hardy look bad. They made George look small, petty, like someone so insecure in their own position that they needed to tear someone else down to feel important. The audience in the studio sat in stunned silence. They came expecting morning show fluff, light conversation, maybe a funny anecdote or two. Instead, they got a front row seat to what happens when professional courtesy breaks down completely, when someone mistakes cruelty for cleverness. And Tom Hardy, walking off that set, shoulders back, head high, showed everyone watching that you don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to make a scene to make a point. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own humiliation. He didn't owe George an explanation. He didn't owe the show another second of his time. He'd given them the opportunity to have a good interview, a productive conversation, a chance to actually connect with someone who had interesting things to say. They wasted it. He didn't. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. George, hiding behind his position, his desk, his perceived authority. Tom, standing in his truth, armed with nothing but his own sense of worth. One man using his platform as a weapon, the other refusing to be a victim. This wasn't about egos clashing. This was about one ego running wild, while the other person tried desperately to maintain basic professional standards. Tom gave George multiple chances to change course, to dial it back, to remember that they were supposed to be having a conversation, not a confrontation. Every time, George doubled down, until there was nothing left to do but leave. And leave he did, with more grace than George showed in the entire interview. No burning bridges, no threats, no promises of retaliation. Just a calm, clear statement of boundaries and a refusal to let them be crossed any further. That's strength, real strength. Not the manufactured tough guy image George had mocked, but actual backbone. The kind that lets you walk away from a bad situation without needing to get the last word, without needing to win, without needing anything except your own peace of mind. The cameras captured every second, every word, every expression, every moment of an interview that started bad and got worse until it simply couldn't continue. And through it all, Tom Hardy maintained his composure, his dignity, and his sense of self. He didn't go on that show looking for a fight. He went looking for a conversation. When it became clear that wasn't what was being offered, he made a choice. The right choice. The only choice that someone with self-respect could make. Walk away. Sometimes that's all you can do. When someone is determined to misunderstand you, to mock you, to use you as a stepping stone for their own ego, the only winning move is not to play. And Tom Hardy understood that in a way, George Stephanopoulos clearly didn't. Because George thought he was in control. He thought his position gave him power over the situation. But power isn't about where you sit or what title you have. It's about self-possession. And in that regard, Tom Hardy had all the power in the room. The interview ended not because George decided to end it, but because Tom decided he'd had enough. That shift in power was visible, tangible, impossible to miss. One moment George was running the show, making his little comments, enjoying himself. The next moment, his guest was gone, and he was left explaining to millions of viewers why. And what explanation could he possibly give? That he was just joking? That Tom couldn't take a little ribbing? Those excuses fall flat when you watch the actual exchange, when you hear the tone, when you see the deliberate attempts to humiliate and diminish. No, there was no explanation that would make George look good here, because what he did wasn't good. It was petty, it was mean, and it backfired spectacularly. Tom Hardy walked off that set, and in doing so, he taught a masterclass in self-respect, in knowing when to engage and when to withdraw, in understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting, not because you can't win them, but because winning them requires you to compromise yourself. And Tom Hardy wasn't willing to do that. Not for a morning show appearance, not for publicity, not for anything. That's the real story here. Not that an interview went wrong, but that when faced with disrespect, one man chose dignity over compliance, chose self-worth over people-pleasing, chose to walk away with his head high rather than sit there and take it. George Stephanopoulos learned something that morning. You can't force people to accept poor treatment. You can't use your platform to bully people into submission. And when you try, when you push someone too far, they might just stand up and leave. And then you're left sitting at your big desk, in your big studio, explaining to everyone watching why your guest decided you weren't worth their time. That empty chair became a symbol, a reminder, a lesson. Treat people with respect, or they'll leave, and they'll be justified in doing so. Every single time.